Can you guess what was the largest company in the Australian stock market index in 1948?
I'm going to say BHP.
Yeah. 1978.
BHP.
BHP. In 1948, it was worth $82 million. Today, it is worth $215 billion.
Incredible.
262,000% return. So, Bryce, I guess the question with that big wind up for today's episode.
We can leave it there. What do we need to say? It's massive.
Hero or sidekick?
Welcome to Sidekick. I'm Bryce and I'm joined by my regular co-host Ren, and we are your trusty sidekicks. In today's episode, we're deep diving into BHP to understand what has powered the mining company's growth. And importantly, we ask, as BHP transitions from fossil fuels to a green metals future, will these superpowers endure? Ren, welcome.
Thanks, Bryce. Good to be here. I'm excited for this one. The big Australian we're talking about today.
Yes.
One of the world's biggest mining companies, the world's biggest mining company by some measures, and a company that has powered the Australian share market for generations.
Yeah.
How we wanted to start today was to just talk about how strong BHP has been over time. And I think one of the great things about stock market indexes is that they give us a measure of how companies are performing relative to each other. Every quarter they rebalance. New great companies, as they're growing, take up more of the index. Slower growing or declining companies phase out of the index over time. And so we can get a snapshot of the Australian economy or the world economy at any point in time. The best example is in the US. The S&P 500, the index of the 500 biggest US companies, is constantly changing. In 1980, the biggest company in the index, can you guess it?
IBM,
yes.
Been doing this a while.
No one ever gets fired buying IBM was the saying in the 1980s in funds management. But you will have got beaten your fund would have got beaten if you'd just been buying IBM. Because by 2000, they were no longer the biggest company. They had been outcompeted and other companies had outperformed. Can you guess who was the largest company in 2000?
GE.
General Electric. You have been doing this for a while. Fast forward 20 years, GE falls off in a big way. 2020, biggest company.
Between Apple and Microsoft.
Apple was the biggest in 2020. And as we get to the end of 2024, what is the biggest company today?
NVIDIA.
Yeah, at time of recording, NVIDIA. Don't shoot the messenger if that changes between now and when we release it. But you can see that over time, the index changes as the economy changes and different companies rise and fall. So if we come back to Australia, the Australian Centre for Financial Studies have researched the Aussie stock market going back to 1948.
Nice.
Can you guess what was the largest company in the Australian stock market index in 1948?
Well, Ren, I'm going to have to say, given we are here talking about BHP, you've wound it up. I'm going to say BHP.
Yeah. How about 1958?
BHP.
Okay, fast forward 10 years, 1968.
BHP.
BHP, I think you're getting the point. 1978 and 1988.
BHP.
BHP, you are getting the hang of this. How about 1998?
BHP.
No.
Really?
Telstra.
Really?
Yeah. Telstra 1, National Australia Bank 2, BHP was actually 3rd.
Oh, NAB in 2.
Yeah.
Wow.
But not to worry, by 2008, no points for guessing who was once again the biggest company in the Aussie stock market. BHP.
Wow.
Today, in 2024, it is the second biggest company on the ASX after Commonwealth Bank. But this is a company that has survived decade after decade, generation after generation. It has powered the Australian stock market, and its superpowers would have endured. So in 1948, it was worth $82 million. Today, it is worth $215 billion.
Incredible.
That is a 262,000% return over 76 years, or 11% compound annual growth rate.
Incredible.
And that doesn't include the very generous dividends BHP has paid over that time.
Well done to those early investors who got in on the IPO.
So, Bryce, I guess the question with that big wind up for today's episode...
we can leave it there. What do we need to say? It's massive.
Is how did we get here and will it endure?
Well, let's start with a review of its history and the first of its superpowers, which is BHP had a captured resource. And it all started back in September of 1883, where a guy called Charles Rasp, who was a boundary rider for the Mount Gipps sheep station in Western New South Wales, found what he thought was a nice little nugget of silver on the station. So it turned out to be mainly lead with traces of silver, and that was the start of BHP.
That was the start. The Syndicate of Seven, as it has since been known in BHP history, Charles Rasp and a number of his compatriots staked out a 40-acre claim, the biggest mining lease taken out on a payable ore body in Australia at that time. This was a massive mining lease, and they started exploring. They formed a company, which was Broken Hill Proprietary Company, and they started operating their silver, zinc, and lead mine at Broken Hill in Western New South Wales. And they found a massive ore body. The first consignment of silver from their mine was sent down to Melbourne and put on display as a way to drum up interest in their stock market listing to try and raise more money. And some skeptics thought the promoters were merely using silver from somewhere else in an effort to ramp up shares because it created so much silver and it's such a high quality.
There you go.
So I think, you said that the first superpower was captured resource. And I think for any mining company you're looking at, the starting point is the quality of the ore body, the quality of the resource that they have to mine, and how accessible that resource is, because that will affect how much it costs to extract. And if you look at all the great mining companies that have emerged in Australia and around the world, it honestly isn't that complicated. How good is the resource? How accessible is the resource? And how cost effectively can they extract the resource? And then everything else is kind of secondary. Fortescue, BHP, Rio, the story plays out over and over again.
And that brings us to superpower number 2 for BHP, which was technical innovation. Now, BHP found that they had huge amounts of sulfide tailings in their mines that the mining industry for many a year had thought was impossible to extract quality materials from, like silver, lead, and zinc, and thought of it as being worthless. However, BHP managed to invent a way to extract these minerals through a flotation vessel. This obviously led to them being able to extract this where other miners hadn't. And this modern version is now called the Potter-Del-Prat process and is still used today.
Yeah, I think not to shortchange the BHP guys. I think Del Prat was the BHP guy in 1902 who started it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, still used today. And I think, again, to broaden this from just BHP to the mining and resource industry more generally, we see time and time again that where there is a new technical innovation, it really can open up some big winners in the space. The obvious one in our lifetime is fracking, and the way that the oil and gas industry was able to extract huge amounts of oil from previously inaccessible shale rock, and just created some huge winners. This is a story that repeats time and time again in the resources industry, where it's cost ineffective to access a resource, and then someone has that breakthrough, and that sort of changes everything. And so in 1902, that was BHP.
So superpower number 3, Ren, is around their capital management and how they have been buying and selling projects around the world. Now, we have a bit of a challenge here for you. We've got 100 years of BHP's acquisition history, mergers and acquisition history. Can we do this in 100 seconds?
Okay, you start the timer. I am not confident, but let's give it a try.
Okay.
1915, they moved into steelworks in Newcastle, the first large-scale steelworks in Australia. 1934, they started building military aircraft in Australia with their steel, convinced the Japanese were preparing for war. 1967, they moved into the oil and gas industry with Esso. They discovered oil in the Bass Strait. In the 50s and 60s, they also expanded overseas, PNG first, then eventually across the world, Chile, Canada, Brazil. 1968, iron ore was developed at Mount Newman in the Pilbara region in WA, one of the best iron ore regions in the world. 1984, they buy Utah Mines from General Electric. 86, buy Monsanto Oil. 87, buy Hamilton Oil. 88 by Gulf Energy Development, 89 by Pacific Resources. You know that the 80s were a big deal-making period, and they were right amongst it. In 1991, they discover diamonds in Canada. Keep that secret for about 4 months before word gets out. In 2001, seminal moment in their history, they merge with Anglo-Dutch Billiton, forming BHP Billiton, dual listed in both London and Australia. 2002, they demerged BlueScope Steel, or the company that would become BlueScope Steel. 2005, they buy one of their big projects today, the Olympic Dam mine in South Australia. 2007, they tried to buy Rio Tinto, ultimately failed because the GFC took hold, but imagine the world where they had succeeded. 2010, they get into the potash market, one of their big markets today, by buying the Canadian potash explorer Athabasca Potash and following it up with an attempted hostile takeover of Potash Corp, which was blocked by the Canadian government. 2015, demerger of South 32, a collection of their aluminium, coal, manganese, nickel, and silver assets. 32 projects south of the equator, that is where the name comes from. 2018, they sold their shale oil and gas business to BP. 2022, they exited their oil and gas business entirely by merging it with Woodside. And 2023, they bought Oz Minerals, who have a copper project right near their Olympic Dam project.
Okay, you did it in 140 seconds.
Oh.
But fair call. A lot to get through there.
Okay.
So let's take a bit of a breath and just have unpack what we've gone through here, which is a story over decades of mergers and acquisitions. I think history shows that Australian companies love mergers and acquisitions, but BHP, I think, has been relatively successful in this space.
Yeah.
And one of the key takeaways is demerging a lot of projects that are not so much value creating, but it's time to move on.
Yeah.
And one that really sticks out to me is actually South 32. I remember when we were at uni, it's a listed company now in its own right. Yeah. Still going, but they felt that aluminium, coal, manganese, nickel, and silver assets no longer relevant to the direction they were going.
Yeah. I think when we think about capital management, we can often just think about it as buying and selling companies. But a key part of capital management, especially for capital-intensive industries like mining, is also just only dedicating your limited capital to the highest return projects. And so people might wonder, like they had these 32 projects. Why did they demerge them? It's because that limited investment could have been better spent on other projects.
Yeah.
And so, if it might feel like you're giving it away for free, just demerging it. I mean, shareholders obviously still get shares, but that is why. That is capital management to a T. I also think if you look at this story more generally, you can see how they moved with the time. So 1915, they get into steelworks in Newcastle. That steelworks was shut down in 1998 as domestically produced steel just was uncompetitive with increasing global competition. In 1967, they get into oil, and that is right as just the post-World War II oil boom is just taking hold. Everyone's buying cars. The Arab states are finding oil. That was the time to get into the business. And then they were out of fracking in 2018, out of oil and gas completely in 2022. You can see they're just kind of moving with the times and trying to ensure that their projects are not only, profitable and low cost, but also where the world is going from a resource perspective.
Well, look at 2023, Oz Minerals, massive copper project.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty clear where they're trying to go there.
Yeah. So I think superpower number 3, capital management, and this is something where a lot of companies will come unstuck. And it's, I guess, just testament to the fact that they're such a great business with such a long track record that can attract the best talent and then train the best talent.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to BHP today. After all of that mergers and acquisitions, it is the world's largest mining company by market capitalization, as well as the 3rd largest mining company by revenue, 2nd largest company here in Australia at the time of recording. Now, to give you a breakdown of revenue for FY24 across the businesses, 50% of its revenue comes from its iron ore mining division. 33% now comes from its copper, 14% from coal, and then the remainder in nickel and potash. Which brings us to superpower number 4, Ren, which is its cost advantage in mining.
Simply, in mining, lowest cost producers win. And the reason for that is that the product they're selling is a commodity. Their prices are set internationally, and for buyers, whether you're buying Fortescue, Rio, Vale, or BHP iron ore, it's basically all the same thing. Like, if you're buying the same grade, you're getting the same product, you want to be paying the same price. And so the mining companies that do the best are the mining companies that can produce at the lowest cost. For BHP, there's always a bit of tension amongst the iron ore miners about who has the lowest cost to produce. But BHP claim they have that with iron ore. They also believe they have that with potash, with their Jansen project that they're currently in the process of expanding. So when you're looking at mining, and let's talk about iron ore here specifically, the metric that you'll often see in company reports and analysis, so just so you're familiar with the term, it's you'll see C1. Now, C1 cost is the unit cost representing the direct cost of production, the cost of actually getting the iron ore out of the ground. It doesn't include corporate overheads, how much salary they're paying the CEO. It doesn't include capital expenditure, how much it costs to build the mine. It's just to get that next ton of ore out of the ground, how much does it cost? Now, for BHP, they claim that they're the lowest cost major iron ore producer for the last 4 years. They claim that their C1 cost is just above $15 a tonne. The next competitor is around $20. So, that's more money they're making each tonne sold than their competitors.
How does this give them protection in a commodity cycle?
So as the price falls, the highest cost producers have to become unprofitable first, and they have to close down their projects first because it's no longer profitable to continue going. The lowest cost producers are the most resilient. And if you think about how a commodity cycle moves in supply and demand will re-find an equilibrium before the last producer stops producing, if that makes sense. Like when supply is greater than demand, it's not like demand is zero. Like there will always be demand. And so as the highest cost producers, as price falls, the highest cost producers go offline, there's less and less supply in the market. At some point, the market will come into equilibrium. The lowest cost producers have that protection that they can survive through the cycle in the way that marginal projects with higher costs can't.
So I think that's something to consider with all commodity businesses that are in this position, is that being that lowest or one of the lowest gives that level of not certainty, but protection that in a down cycle, you're going to be okay.
What you want to see from a great resources business is that, sure, their profit will move as the cycle, but their projects won't have to open and shut.
So those are the 4 superpowers of BHP and the business that it is today. But as we said in the intro, how do these superpowers set it up for the future, and can the superpowers sustain? Well, we will be taking a quick break, and on the other side, we will be answering that question. We'll be right back. Big news! Superhero is now a premier partner of the Sydney Swans and Hawthorn Football Club.
As the first ever superannuation partner of the Swans and the official superannuation and share trading partner of the Hawks, Superhero is dedicated to empowering Australians to grow their financial future with the same passion and dedication they bring to the games.
To celebrate the partnership, Superhero is giving away 50 custom-made Superhero Sharon footballs. You can find more details and a link to join the giveaway in this episode's description. Terms and conditions apply.
Download the Superhero app now and take control of your financial future.
Welcome back to Sidekick. We are unpacking BHP and its superpowers. This part of the episode, we're going to be looking at the future of BHP and if the superpowers can sustain. Ren, the future of BHP is looking different to the last 50 years.
Yeah, well, I think the future of the mining industry is looking different to the last 50 years. The story of decarbonisation and renewable energy only happens with green metals, only happens with copper, nickel, lithium, all of those metals that are required to make solar panels, make wind turbines, make the electrical grid infrastructure that we need to make batteries for grid scale storage and electric vehicles. Like everything that we are trying to transition towards requires a lot of metals. And so that is the story that is really capturing the mining industry's attention at the moment. According to the Energy Transitions Commission, for the 72 countries that have committed to net zero by 2050, if those countries are going to hit their goals, it will require 15 times the wind power we have today, 25 times the solar, a tripling of the grid size overall, and a 60-fold increase in the fleet of electric vehicles.
That's daunting.
So they're massive. And obviously, with that comes huge increases in demand for minerals. Same source, Energy Transitions Commission. By 2030, copper and nickel demand could rise by 50 to 70%. Cobalt and neodymium, don't even know what that is, by 150%, and graphite and lithium 6 to 7-fold. So this is the green metal story that's emerging.
And so this is presenting a once-in-a-generation opportunity for countries. As The Economist summed it up, the metals rush will not be as big as the oil and gas boom that toppled King Coal after the Second World War, but there are some echoes with the past. Between 1940 and 1970, the share of hydrocarbons in the energy supply of rich countries rose from 26% to nearly 70%. Once marginal economies in the Middle East were transformed into uber-rich petrostates. Between 1970 and 1980, the GDP per person of Qatar and Saudi Arabia grew 12 to 18-fold, respectively. This time, the transition will bring windfalls to countries we dub the green commodity superpowers. And Ren, Australia is right in the thick of it.
Australia won't just be a green metal superpower. If we play this opportunity right, we could be the green metal superpower. So for some of the key metals, we are right up there in terms of reserves that we have under the ground. Nickel, we are equal first at 21% of the world's nickel alongside Indonesia. Copper, we have the world's third most reserves, 11% of the world's reserves. Lithium, we're second, 24% of the world's lithium reserves. Cobalt, we are the third largest producer at the moment, although really there's only one game in town when it comes to cobalt. The Congo produces above 70% of the world's cobalt. Finally, aluminium, we are the world's second largest producer as well. So nickel, copper, lithium, cobalt, aluminium, all these green metals, we have huge reserves.
And someone's got to grab it. And that's BHP. Well, BHP are at least trying to transition their portfolio to some of these incredibly important minerals. They sold their oil and gas assets, their shale assets in 2018, and they fully exited out of it in 2022. When it comes to coal, they sold 2 coal mines to Whitehaven in 2024. Copper, they are trying to acquire more. They acquired Oz Minerals in 2023, and then they're in the potash game, investing another $4.9 billion into their Canadian potash project, Jansen, in 2023.
So BHP are trying to capture the opportunity. They're not the only mining company trying to capture the opportunity. We've seen Rio Tinto really focus on lithium, and a couple of their recent acquisitions will make them the third biggest player globally in lithium. We can see that all of these mining companies are sort of seeing the writing on the wall and trying to reorientate their portfolios.
Absolutely.
Well, not all, like, Whitehaven's just doubling down on coal, but Woodside is doubling down on oil and gas. But a lot of them are really moving towards future-facing commodities. And so all of the superpowers that we talked about at the beginning, like making sure you have the best resources, making sure you have the technological innovation to unlock resources that were previously thought uneconomical, establishing yourself as the lowest cost producer so you can manage through the cycle, and then having a really disciplined and effective capital management program to ensure that every dollar you invest is getting a high return on investment. As investors, they're the things that you want to be analyzing. They're the things that you want to see from your best mining companies, because all of the legacy projects that gave BHP those superpowers, the oil and gas projects and the coal projects, they no longer apply, unfortunately. They now need to go and find those next group of projects that will reestablish those superpowers in a green metals era.
Well, will BHP still be Australia's largest company in another 10 years? Who knows, but I'm sure with the opportunity in front of it, it has a pretty good chance. That brings us to the end of today's Sidekick episode. If you're interested to learn more about how you can grow your wealth like a superhero, head to superhero.com.au/registration.
And make sure you subscribe to Sidekick wherever you are listening or watching so you don't miss an episode. That's it from us, your trusty sidekicks. We'll be back uncovering more superpowers next episode.